Hello everyone, and welcome to Lore Time with the Chibi Inquisitor. Tonight we look into the Xenos race, known as the Necrons. To start, we have a quote from Inquisitor Bronislaw Rzezwak at the Conclave of Ha. "There is a terrible darkness descending upon the galaxy, and we shall not see it ended in our lifetimes." The Necrons are a mysterious Xenos species of humanoid robotic skeletal warriors that have lain dormant in their stasis tombs for more than 60 million Terran years. Though they have begun to awaken at last, they are the soulless creations and former servants of the ancient Catan, the terrible star gods of Eldari myth. The Necrons are ancient beyond reckoning, predating even the birth of the Eldari. At long last, however, they are beginning to awaken from their tomb worlds, for the galaxy is ripe for conquest, and the restoration of the Necron Empire since its disappearance of the Old Ones, more than 60 million standard years ago. The Necrons are a completely robotic humanoid species, whose technological prowess is probably unmatched by any other intelligent species of the galaxy. Yet, out of a desire for vengeance against the more fortunate long-lived ancient Xenos people called the Old Ones, and the trickery of the godlike intelligence known as the Catan, the Necrons shed their original organic forms and lost all forms of compassion and empathy. They have become, instead, ruthless, undying killing machines who are determined to exert their mastery over the galaxy once more. Across the galaxy, this ancient and terrible species is stirring back to life. Entombed in stasis crypts for millions of Terran years, they have slumbered through the aeons, waiting for the galaxy to heal from the wounds of a long and bloody war. Now, after 60 million standard years of dormancy, a great purpose begins. On a desolate world throughout long bereft of life, ancient machineries wake in the grim purpose, commencing the slow process of revivification that will see the entombed within free to stride across the stars once again. The unstoppable, undying Necron legions are rising. Let the galaxy beware. All Necrons, from the lowliest of warrior to the most regal of lords, are driven by one ultimate goal: to restore their ancient ruling dynasties to glory, and to bring the galaxy under their rule once more, as it was in the ancient days. Such was the edict long ago, encoded into the Necron mind, and it is a command so fundamental to the being that it cannot be denied. Yet it is no small task, for the Necrons are awakening from their tomb worlds to find the galaxy of the 41st millennium, as recorded by the Imperial calendar, changed. Many tomb worlds are no more, destroyed by cosmic disaster or alien invasion. Others are damaged, their entombed legions afflicted by slow madness, or worn to dust by entropy's irresistible onset. Degenerate alien species squat amongst the ruins of those Necron tomb worlds that remain, little aware of the greatness they defile with their upstart presence. Yet there is no salvation to be found in such ignorance. The undying have come to reclaim their lands, and the living shall be swept aside. Yet, if billions of Necrons have been destroyed by the passage of eternity, countless billions more remain to see their dominion reborn. They are not creatures of flesh and blood, these Necrons, but android warriors who, immortal forms are forged from living metal. As such, they are almost impervious to destruction, and their mechanical bodies are swift to heal even the gravest wounds. Given time, severed limbs reattach, armor plating recnets and shattered mechanical organs are rebuilt. The only way, then, to assure Necron's destruction is to overwhelm its ability to self-repair, to inflict such massive damage that its ancient regenerative systems cannot keep pace. Even then, should irreparable damage occur, the Necron will often simply phase out, an automated Viridane teleportation beam returning it to the safety of the stasis crypts, where it remains in storage until such times as repairs can be carried out. The sciences by which such feats are achieved remain a mystery to outsiders, for the Necrons do not share their secrets with lesser species, and have set contingencies to prevent their supreme technologies from falling into the wrong hands. Should a Necron warrior fall and fail to phase out, it simply self-destructs and is consumed in a blaze of emerald light. Outwardly, this appears little different to the glow of the teleportation, leaving the foe to wonder whether the Necron has finally been destroyed or has merely retreated to its tomb. Victory over the Necrons is therefore always a tenuous thing, and a hard-won battle grants little surety of ultimate victory. For the Necrons, defeats are minor inconveniences, the preludes to future triumphs, nothing more. Immortality has brought patience. The perils that the Necrons survived in ancient times carry the lesson that their people can overcome any opposition, and if they have but the will to try. And if the Necrons possess only a single trait, it is the will as unbending as adamantium. Only one hope can now preserve the other intelligent species of the galaxy from the Necrons' advance, the endless legions of silent, deathless warriors rising from the long-forgotten tombs. If the Necrons can be prevented from waking to their full glory, if the scattered tomb worlds can be prevented from unifying, then there is a chance of survival. If not, then the great powers of the galaxy will surely fall, and the Necrons shall rule supreme for all eternity, undying, cruel, and utterly. Here we look into the history regarding the Necrons, starting with the beings known as the Yuctan, or as they were formerly known, the Star Gods. The birth of the entities later known as the Yuctan, or the Star Gods, occurred at the same time as the moment of creation itself, as they formed from the vast interstate energies first unleashed by the churning mass of cataclysmic force. In that anarchic interweaving of matter and energy, the sea of stars began to swirl into an existence, and for an aeon the universe was nothing more than hot hydrogen gas and light elemental dust, ruled over by the gravitic force of billions of newborn suns. Long before the first planets had formed and cooled, the very first truly self-aware beings emerged, their thoughts encased within the lines of force produced by the plasma and electromagnetic flares of the stars themselves. In later times, these entities would become known as the Yuctan, but in their early existence they were nothing like the malevolent beings they would eventually become. They were little more than monstrous energy parasites that suckled upon the solar energies of the stars that had brought them into existence, shortening the lives of otherwise main sequence stars by millions of standard years. In time, these star vampires learned to move on the diaphanous wings of the universe's electromagnetic flux, leaving their birthplaces to drift through the cosmic ether to their new stellar feeding grounds and begin their cycle of stellar destruction once more. Beings of pure energy, they paid no mind to the hunks of solid matter they passed in the vacuum of space. The blazing geothermal fires and weak geomagnetic fields of these nascent planets, insufficient to be worth feeding even their ravenous hunger. Here we will look into the Old Ones, the once ancient enemy of the Necrons. Just as the stars gave birth to their children, so the planets of the newborn galaxy eventually brought forth lifeforms composed of matter which began the long evolutionary climb to self-awareness. The first sentient beings of the Milky Way galaxy, known to have developed a civilization technologically advanced enough to cross the stars, was a reptilian race of beings called the Old Ones by the Eldari who knew them best. They possessed a slow, cold-blooded, but deep wisdom, having long studied the stars and raised astronomy and physics to such a level that their science and technology would appear to humanity like an arcane art. Their understanding of the workings of the universe were such that they could manipulate the alternate dimensions and undertake great work of psychic engineering. Their science allowed them to cross the vast gulfs of space with a single step, via the myriad of warp gates they have built to connect the worlds of the galaxy in a vast network, much like the Eldari webway of today, though on a much larger scale. The Old Ones had spread their spawn to many places in the galaxy, but they also knew that all life was precious. Where they passed, they seeded new intelligent species and reshaped thousands of worlds to make them their own, according to their predetermined environmental and geographic criteria. It is believed by some in the Adeptus Mechanicus that even Terra felt the Old One's touch, long before humanity's rise to self-awareness, though this notion is considered heretical at best by the ecclesiarchy, as the Imperial Creed teaches that mankind was made in the image of the God Emperor before his spirit was incarnated into a physical flesh millennia ago. The Old One's civilization reached its height in the galaxy in excess of 16 million standard years ago. The Old Ones were responsible for the creation or genetic advancement of most of the currently active intelligent species of the galaxy, including the Eldari, the Kroks, the Orcs precursors, the Slan, and the Jakiro, though it is unknown what, if any, role they played in the evolution of humanity. The Old Ones were potent psychics, who routinely used their powers of the warp for a wide variety of technological applications, and had constructed a system of instantaneous, faster-than-light portals through warp space that were ultimately adapted to create the webway, and was its more advanced precursor. These great portals connect all of the Old One's colony worlds across vast swathes of interstellar space. The Necron Tier and the Wars of Succession. The humanoid species that would become the Necrons began their existence under a fearsome scourging star in the far reaches of the galaxy, known as the Halo Stars region, billions of standard years before humanity evolved on old Earth. Assailed at every moment by an ionizing solar winds and intense radiation storms, the flesh and blood Necron Tier became a morbid people whose precarious lifespans were riven by constant loss. What little information the Imperium of Man has recovered on the Necron Tier tells that their lives were short and uncertain, their bodies blighted and consumed at an early age by the terrible cancers and other illnesses linked to the high levels of ionizing radiation given off by their sun. Necron Tier cities were built in anticipation of their inhabitants' early demise, as the living were only a brief residence living in the shadows of the vast sepulchres and tombs of their ancestors. Likewise, the ruling dynasties were founded on the anticipation of demise. The living were thought of as no more than a temporary residence, hurrying through the more permanent and lasting structures raised to honor the dead. On the Necron Tier homeworld, the greatest monuments were always built for the dead, never the living. Driven by necessity, the Necron Tier eventually escaped their crucible prison and struck out for the stars, hopeful of carving an empire in which they could realize their species' potential, free from the lethal energies of their birth star. Unable to find peace on their own world, the Necron Tier blindly groped outward into the universe to explore other stars. Using stasis crypts and slow-moving antimatter-powered torch ships, the Necron Tier began to colonize distant worlds. Little by little, the Necron Tier dynasties spread ever further, until much of the ancient galaxy answered to their rule. From the earliest days, the rulers of individual Necron Tier dynasties were themselves governed by the Triarch, a council composed of 3 monarchs, or pharaons. The head of the Triarch was known as the Silent King, for he addressed his subjects only through the other 2 pharaons who ruled alongside him, normally at hereditary position. The uncertain lifespans of the Necron Tier ensured that the title of Silent King nonetheless passed from one royal dynasty to another many times. The final days of the Necron Tier Empire occurred in the reign of Zarkref, the last of the Silent Kings. Sometime during their slow expansion, the Necron tier encountered an ancient intelligent species, far older than any other in existence in the known galaxy. Collectively, these beings were known as the Old Ones, and they were absolute masters of forms of energy the Necron tier could not even conceive of, yet alone wield. The Old Ones had long ago conquered the secrets of immortality, yet they refused to share the gift of eternal life with the Necron tier, who yet bore the genetic curse of their bitter star they had been born under. The colonization of much of the galaxy by the reptilian mystics has been immensely swifter and more expansive than that of the Necron tier, because of their warp gates and masteries of the immaterium. That rapid expansion and the Old Ones' incredibly long, if not downright immortal lifespans, kindled a burning, jealous rage in the Necron tier, which ate at their culture spiritually as much as their physical cancer consumed their bodies. The Necron tier were astonished to learn that another intelligent species enjoyed such long lives while their own were cut so brutally short. But as time wore on, further strife came to the Necron tier. Each dynasty of the Necron tier sought to claim its own destiny, and some began to secede from the overall Necron tier empire and the rule of the Triarch. Soon the great houses were engaged in all-out internecine conflicts known to Necron tier history as the War of Secession. Had circumstances remained as they were for but a generation more, it is possible that the Necron tier would have wiped themselves out, as so many species had before them and shall do in the future. As their territory grew ever wider and more diverse, the unity that had made them strong was eroded, and bitter wars were waged as entire realms fought to win independence. Ultimately, the Pharaons of the Triarch, the ruling council of the Necron tier empire, realized that the only hope for unity lay in conflict with an external enemy, but there were few who could prove a credible threat. Only the Old Ones, the first of all the galaxy's known sentient species, were a prospective foe powerful enough to bind the feuding Necron tier dynasties to a common cause. Such a war was simplicity itself to justify, for the Necron tier have ever rankled at the Old Ones' refusal to share the secrets of eternal life. So did the Triarch declare war on the Old Ones. At the same time, they offered amnesty to any secessionist dynasties who willingly returned to the fold. Thus lured by the spoils of victory and the promise of immortality, the separatist Necron tier realms abandoned their war of secession, and the war in heaven began. It was the last of the Silent Kings who headed the Triarch of the Necron tier empire, Thazar who formulated the plan that would change everything forever, and the consequences that would echo through history for countless millions of standard years. In a typically bitter act of jealousy and resentment for the Necron tier race, it was the Silent King who used the Old One's refusal to share the secret of immortality as a pretext for war, forcibly uniting the entire Necron tier species beneath the rule of the Triarch against their common foe. War erupted across the stars, yet while the Silent King succeeded in uniting his hateful people, it was a war the Necron tier could not win, not on their own. The terrible wars between the Old Ones and the Necron tier that followed, known later in Eldari myth as the War in Heaven, would fill a library in their own right, but the Necron tier could never win. Their superior technology was consistently outmaneuvered by the Old Ones, thanks to their mastery of the webway portals and warp gates. The Necron tier were pushed back until they were little more than an irritation to the Old Ones' dominion of the galaxy, a quiescent threat clinging to their irradiated world among the halo stars. They were exiled and forgotten. The Necron tier's fury was cooled by their long millennia of imprisonment on their homeworld, slowly transforming into an utter hatred towards all forms of intelligent life, an implacable determination to avenge themselves upon their seemingly invincible enemies. But in the face of defeat, the always fragile unity of the Necron tier began to fracture once more. No longer did the prospect of a common enemy have any hold over the disparate dynasties. Scores of generations now have lived and died in the service of an unwinnable war, and many Necron tier dynasties would have gladly sued for peace with the Old Ones if the ruling Triarch had permitted it. Thus began the second iteration of the war Succession, more widespread and ruinous than any that had come before. So fractured had the Necrontyr dynasties become by then that, had the Old Ones been so inclined, they could have wiped out their foes with ease. Faced with the total collapse of their rule, the Triarchs searched desperately for a means of restoring order. In this, their prayers were answered, though the price for their species would be incalculably high. It was during the reign of the Silent King Zathkreth that the godlike energy beings known as the C'tan first blighted the Necrontyr. It is impossible to say for certain how the Necrontyr first made contact with the C'tan, though many misleading, contradictory, and one-sided accounts of these events exist. The dusty archives of the tomb world of Solomons claim that it was just an accident, a chance discovery made by a stellar probe during the investigation of a dying star. The Book of the Mournful Night, held under close guard in the Aldari's Black Library's innermost sanctum, tells rather the raw hatred that the Necrontyr held as a race for the Old Ones sang out across space, acting as a beacon that the C'tan could not ignore. Another account claims that from the earliest days of their civilization, the Necrontyr scientists have been deeply engaged in stellar studies to try and understand and protect themselves from their own sun's baleful energies. After long, bitter centuries of searching for some power to unleash upon the Old Ones, the Necrontyr researchers used stellar probes to discover unusual electrodynamic anomalies in the oldest dying stars of the galaxy. In the complex skeins of energetic plasma of these suns, the Necrontyr found a sentience that was more ancient than that any of the corporeal species in creation, including the Old Ones. They had discovered entities of pure energy that had spawned during the birth of stars aeons before. These entities had little conception of what the rest of the universe entailed when the Necrontyr first found them, instead of simply feeding upon the solar flares and magnetic storms of these bloated red giants. But here was the weapon the Necrontyr had long sought to bring about the downfall of the Old Ones. Beings they believed the C'tan were the progeny of the death god they worshipped. However first contact occurred, the shadow of the C'tan fell over the oldest Necrontyr dynasty first. The power of these star-born creatures was incredible. The raw energy of the stars made animate, and the Necrontyr called them the C'tan, or star gods in their own tongue. The C'tan were dispersed across areas larger than whole planets, their consciousness too vast for humanoids to comprehend. How the Necrontyr even managed to communicate with them is unknown to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Understanding that such diffuse minds could never perceive the material universe without manifestating themselves in a material form, some Necrontyr actively sought the C'tan's favor and oversaw the forging of physical shells for the C'tan to occupy, cast from the living metal called necrodermis. Fragmentary Aldari legends tell of the translucent streamers of electromagnetic force shifting across space, as the star vampires coiled into their new bodies in the physical realm, across the incorporeal bridge of starlight. Thus clad, the C'tan took to the physical shapes of the Necrontyr's half-forgotten ancient gods, hiding their own desires beneath cloaks of obsequious subservience. Incomprehensible forces were compressed into living metal of the necrodermis bodies, which the Necrontyr had forged as full power armor of the C'tan at last found form. As the C'tan focused their consciousness and became ever more aware of their new mode of existence, they came to appreciate the pleasures available to beings of matter and the other realities of corporeal life. The deliciously focused trickles of electromagnetic energy given off by the physical bodies of the Necrontyr, all about them awakened a new hunger in the C'tan, very unlike the one they had just sated using the nourishing but essentially tasteless energies of the stars. So it was that one of the C'tan came before the Silent King Sakra, acting as a forerunner to the coming of its brothers. Amongst its own kind, this C'tan was known as the Deceiver, for it was willfully treacherous. Yet the Silent King knew not the C'tan's true nature, and instead granted the creature an audience. The Deceiver spoke of a war, fought long before the birth of the Necron tier, between the C'tan and the Old Ones. It was a war, he said, that the C'tan had lost. In the aftermath, and fearing the vengeance of the Old Ones, the Deceiver and its brothers had hidden themselves away, hoping one day to find allies with whom they could finally bring the Old Ones to account. In return for this aid, the Deceiver assured it and its brothers would deliver anything that the Necron tier craved. Unity could be theirs once again, and the immortality that they had sought for so long would finally be within their grasp. No price would there be for these great gifts, the Deceiver insisted, for they were but boons to be bestowed upon the valued allies. Thus did the Deceiver speak, and who can say of how much its tale was true? It is doubtful whether even the Deceiver knew, for its trickery had become so much a part of his existence that even the C'tan could no longer divine its root. Yet the Deceiver's word held sway over Zakareth, who, like his ancestors before him, despaired of the divisions that were tearing apart his people. For long solar months he debated this matter with the two other pharaohs of the Triarch and the nobles of his royal court. Through it all, the only dissenting voice was that of Orkan, the court astrologer, who foretold that the alliance between the Necron tier and the C'tan would bring about a new renaissance of glory, but destroy forever the soul of the Necron tier people. Yet desire and ambition swiftly overrode caution, and Orkan's prophecy was dismissed. A Necron tier year after the Deceiver had presented his proposition, the Triarch agreed to the alliance, and so forever doomed their race. For their part, the Necron tier soon fell in awe of the discoveries, and the C'tan moved to take control over their benefactors. The powers of the C'tan manifested in the physical world were indeed almost godlike, and it was not long before the C'tan were being worshipped as the star gods the Necron tier had named them. Perhaps they have become tainted by the material universe they have become a part of, or perhaps this has always been their nature, even when they were bound to suns they fed upon, but the C'tan proved to be more cruel and capricious as the stars from which they were born. They soon revelled in the worship of the Necron tier, and feasted upon the life energies of countless mortal slaves. An excerpt from the Book of Mournful Night. When the Silent King saw what had been done, he knew at last the true nature of the C'tan, and for the doom they had wrought in his name. Armed with weapons of godlike power, and starships that could cross the galaxy in a blink of an eye, the Necron tier stood ready to begin their war against the Old Ones anew, but the C'tan had another gift for their mortal subjects. They offered the Necron tier a path to immortality, and the physical stability their race had always craved. Their diseased flesh would be replaced with the living metal of the necrodermis that made up their star god's own physical forms. The Necron tier's discarded organic husks would be consumed, and their cold metal forms would be then free to pursue their great vengeance against the Old Ones and the rest of the hateful universe, freed forever from their weaknesses of their hated flesh. With the pact between the Necron tier and the C'tan sealed, the star gods revealed the form that immortality would take for the Necron tier, and the great biotransference process began. Colossal cyclopean biofurnaces built by Necron tier artifice roared day and night, and into these the Silent King's people marched, according to the terms of the pact he had made with the C'tan. What blasphemous procedures the Necron tier was subjected to within the raging biofurnaces cannot be known, but certainly each was stripped of flesh and of soul, their body replaced by a shell of living metal, animated by what remained of their guttering self. Above each furnace swooped and dove the ethereal true forms of the C'tan, as they glutted themselves on the castor spiritual energy of an entire species, growing ever stronger. It was only when the Silent King himself emerged from the biotransference process and looked upon what had become of his people that he saw the awful truth of the pact he had made. As Zakareth watched the C'tan feast on the life essence of his people, he realized the terrible depth of his mistake. In many ways, he felt better than he'd had in solar decades. the countless aches and uncertainties of organic life now behind him, his new machine body was far mightier than the frail form he had tolerated for so long, and his thoughts were swifter and clearer than they'd ever been. Yet there was an emptiness gnawing at his mind, an inexpressible hollowness of spirit that defied rational explanation. In that moment he knew with cold certainty that the price of physical immortality had been the loss of his soul. With great sorrow the Silent King beheld the fate he had brought to his people. The Necrontyr were naught but a memory, and the soulless undying Necrons had been reborn in their place. Yet though the price had been steep, biotransference had fulfilled all the promises that the C'tan had made. Even the lowliest of the Necrontyr was now blessed with immortality. Age and hard radiation could do little to erode their new mechanical bodies, and only the most terrible of injuries could destroy them utterly. Likewise, the Necrons now enjoy a political unity that the Necrontyr never had known, though it is achieved through tyranny and complete loss of individuality and emotion rather than any form of consent. The biotransference process had embedded the command protocols in every machine-like Necron's mind, granting Saskareth the unswerving, if programmed loyalty of his subjects. At first, the Silent King embraced this species-wide unanimity, for it was a welcome reprieve from the chaos that had consumed the Necrontyr Empire in the recent years. However, as time wore on, he grew weary of his burden, but dared not sever the command protocols, lest his subjects turn on him seeking revengeance for the terrible curse he had visited upon them. Thus the Necrontyr became the Necrons, cursed to the eternal servitude of their star gods. The C'tan feasted upon the entire Necrontyr's race's life energies, even as they made the transfers, leaving behind only the ghostly echoes of the Necrontyr's consciousness. Only a few of the most strong-willed Necrontyr retained their intellect, personality, and self-awareness, and even they were but shadows of their former selves. They had been purged of so much of what made them unique. Yet most of the Necrons cared not at all for their loss. All that mattered to them was that they would live forever, without disease or death, as their star gods had promised. The Necrontyr species was united as never before. The biotransference process imbued in every one of the Silent King's subjects the command protocols with which he would rule over them with an iron hand. The entire species was now at his command as one, and so it fell upon the Necrons to honor their side of their terrible bargain. Renewed by the devouring of life energies of an entire species, the C'tan was now unstoppable, and with the legions of the Necrons marching in their wake, the Old Ones were doomed. Only one thing truly remained of the old Necrontyr, their burning hatred for all other living intelligent species of the universe. Legions of the undying living metal warriors set out into the galaxy in their tomb ships, and the stars burned in their wake. The Old One's mastery of the warp was now countered by the C'tan's supremacy over the physical universe, and the ancient enemies of the Necrons suffered greatly in the interstellar slaughter that followed. With the C'tan and Necrons fighting as one, the Old Ones were now doomed to defeat. Glutted on the life force of the Necrontyr, the empowered C'tan were nigh unstoppable, and unleashed forces beyond comprehension. Planets were razed, suns extinguished, and whole star systems devoured by black holes called into being by the reality-warping powers of the star gods. Necron legions assailed the Old Ones in every corner of the galaxy. They brought under siege the fortresses of the Old Ones, many allies amongst the younger intelligent races of the galaxy, harvesting the life force of the defenders to feed their ferocious C'tan masters. In the closing years of the War in Heaven, one of the primary factors that led the Necrons' ascendancy was their ability to finally gain access to the Old One's webway. The C'tan known as Thazar, the Burning One, had long desired to carry his eldritch fires into that space beyond space, and so showed the Necrons how to breach its boundaries. Through a series of living stone portals known as dolmen gates, the Necrons were finally able to turn the Old One's greatest weapon against them, vastly accelerating the ultimate end in the war in heaven. The portals offered by the dolmen gates were neither so stable nor so controllable as the naturally occurring entrances to the webway scattered across the galaxy. Indeed, in some curious fashion, the webway can detect when its environs have been breached by a dolmen gate, and its arcane mechanisms swiftly attempt to seal off the infected spur from the rest of the labyrinth dimension, until the danger to its integrity has passed. Thus, Necrons entering the webway had to reach their intended destination through its shifting transdimensional corridors quickly, lest the network itself bring about their destruction. In the wake of these victories, the C'tan and their undying Necron servants now dominated the galaxy. The last planetary bastion of the Old Ones were besieged, and the intelligent races they had neutered became cattle for the obscene hunger of the C'tan. To the younger sentient species of the galaxy, the Necrons and their star gods were cruel masters, callously harvesting their populations at will to feed the C'tan's ceaseless hunger. The C'tan were figures of terror and demanded their adoration and fear in equal measure. For unknown reasons, but probably because of their individual hunger for mortal life energies knew no bounds, the C'tan ultimately began to fight amongst themselves for both sport and out of spite as they unleashed destructive forces beyond mortal comprehension. Among the Eldari, an ancient myth holds that their laughing god tricked the C'tan known as the Outsider into turning on its brothers and beginning their long war for ascendancy. In the course of the C'tan's struggle against one another, destruction on a colossal scale was unleashed. New cities were built by the efforts of millions, and then smashed down once more. As the red harvests of the C'tan and their Necron servants grew thin, C'tan eventually devoured C'tan, until only a few were left in the universe, and they competed amongst themselves for a long age. Eventually, even the Old Ones, who had once been defined by their patience and unstoppable will, became desperate in the face of the Necron assault. They used their great scientific skills to genetically engineer intelligent beings with an even stronger psychic link to the warp, hoping to create servants with the capability of channeling psychic powers to defend themselves against the Necrons, whose soulless nature placed the power of the Immaterium beyond their grasp. They nurtured many potential warrior races, among which are believed to be the earliest members of the Eldari species, and many other Xenos races, including the Rashan, the Jokero, the Knib, and the Quark, and many others. Millennia passed as the Old One's creation finally bore fruit, whilst the C'tan and their Necron servants continued to extinguish life across the galaxy. The Old One's psychically empowered servant races spread across the galaxy, battling the advanced Necron technology with the psychic power of their warp-spawn sorcery. Facing this new onslaught, the C'tan Empire was shattered, as the psychic forces of the Immaterium were anathema to such soulless entities whose existence was wholly contained within the purely physical patterns of their electromagnetic force. For all the destruction they could unleash, they were unable to stop the Old Ones and the younger races' relentless advance across the stars. The C'tan, unified by this great threat, for the first time in millions of Terran years, sought a way to defeat the soul-fueled energies of the younger races. They initiated a great warding, a plan to forever defeat the psychic sorceries of the Old Ones by sealing off the material universe in this vicinity of the Milky Way galaxy from the warp. This was a plan whose first fruits can still be found on the Imperial Fortress world of Cadia, in the form of great pylons of black stone that litter the surface of the world in intricate networks that were once created an area of space-time stability near the Eye of Terror, known as the Cadian Gate. With their godlike powers, it was only a matter of time until the C'tan succeeded and their greatest work was begun. But before it was complete, The seeds of destruction the Old Ones had planted millennia before brought about an unforeseen cataclysm. The growing pains and trauma and collective psychic flaws of the younger races threw the untapped psychically reactive energies of the Immaterium into disorder. War, pain, and destruction were mirrored in the bottomless depths of the Sea of Souls that was the warp, the maelstrom of souls unleashed into the Immaterium by the carnage of the war in heaven, coalesced in the previously formless energies of the warp. Older entities that had existed within the Immaterium transformed into terrifying psychic predators, tearing at the souls of the vulnerable psychers as their own environment was torn apart and reforged into the realm of chaos. The denizens of the warp clustered ferociously at the cracks between the Immaterium and the material universe, seeking new ways to enter the physical realm. The Old Ones brought forth new genetically engineered warrior races to defend their last strongholds, including the technologically mimicking Jakiro, who served as their technicians and maintenance slaves, the formidable greenskin Krog, who embodied the rage and noise of war, and who were the ancestors of the present-day orcs. Yet, for all their efforts, it was already too late. The Old One's intergalactic webway network was breached from the Immaterium and lost to them. Several of their warp gates were destroyed by their own hands to prevent the entities of the warp from spreading to uncorrupted worlds. Despite their best efforts, the Old One's greatest works and places of power were overrun by the horrors their own creations had unleashed. The most terrifying of these were the Enslavers, warp entities whose ability to dominate the minds of younger races and create their own portals into the material realm using transmuted, possessed psychers brought them forth in ever greater numbers. For the Old Ones, this was the final disaster, as the Enslavers took control of their servants. The Pandora's box, unleashed in the warp by the creation of the younger races, finally scattered the last of the Old Ones and broke their power over the galaxy once and for all. Life had stood at the edge of an apocalypse during the war in heaven between the Old Ones and the Catan. Now, as the Enslavers breached from the Immaterium in epidemic proportions, the survivors looked doomed. Ultimately beset by the implacable onset of the Catan and the calamitous warp-spawned perils they themselves mistakenly unleashed, the Old Ones were defeated, scattered, and finally destroyed. Whether the species went extinct or simply fled the galaxy to seek a new haven elsewhere is unknown. Throughout the final stages of the war in heaven, Zaskareth bided his time, waiting for the moment in which the Catan would prove vulnerable. Though the entire Necron race was now his to command, he could not hope to oppose the Catan at the height of their power, and even if he did, and met with success, the Necrons would then have to finish the war in heaven against the Old Ones, and their increasingly potent allied species alone. No, the Old Ones had to be completely and utterly defeated before the Catan could be brought to account for the horrors that they have wrought. And so, when the Catan finally won their great war, their triumph was proved short-lived. With one hated enemy finally defeated and the other spent from a hard-fought victory, the Silent King at last led the Necrons in revolt against the Catan masters. In their arrogance, the Catan did not realize their danger. Until it was too late, the Necrons focused the unimaginable energies of the living universe into weapons too mighty for even the star gods to endure. Alas, the Catan were immortal star spawn, part of the fundamental fabric of reality, and therefore nigh impossible to destroy. So was each Catan instead sundered into thousands of smaller and less powerful fragments, yet this was sufficient to the Silent King's goals. Indeed, he had known the Catan's ultimate destruction to be impossible, and had drawn his plans accordingly. Each Catan shard was bound within a multi-dimensional tesseract labyrinth, as tremelled and secured as a Terran djinn trapped in a bottle. Though the cost of victory was high, millions of Necrons had been destroyed as a consequence of the rebellion, including all of the members of the Triarch, save the Silent King himself. The Necrons were once more in command of their own destiny. The Necrons had been vindicated in their pursuit only of science and control over the material realm, and certainly took pleasure in seeing the Old One's civilization collapse as a result of their overindulgence on psychic power and the end of the Catan domination over their race. Yet, even with the defeat of the Old Ones and the Catan alike, the Silent King saw that the time of the Necrons in the galaxy was over, for the moment at least. They would allow the enslavers to take what was left of the sentient life in the galaxy and let it become an interstellar wasteland. The Psyker swarm would then die away, and in time the galaxy would evolve new life forms who would be less sophisticated and easier to dominate. In addition, the Necrons understood that the mantle of galactic dominion was soon to pass to the Eldari, one of the psychically potent races that had fought alongside the Old Ones throughout the War in Heaven, and had thus come to hate the Necrons and all of their works with the burning passion that is the defining characteristic of their species. The Eldari had survived where the Old Ones had not, and the Necrons, weakened by their expenditure of lives and resources in overthrowing the rule of the Catan, could not stand against them. Yet the Silent King knew that the time of the Eldari would eventually pass, as it must pass for all those beings still cloaked in flesh. It would take millions of Terran years for the Eldari's power to fade, but what mattered is that the Necrons would be there to take advantage of it. So it was that the Silent King ordered the remaining Necron cities to be transformed into great tomb complexes, threaded with stasis crypts. Let the Eldari shape the galaxy for a time. They were but ephemeral, whilst the Necrons were undying and eternal. The Silent King's final command to his people was that they must sleep for the equivalent of 60 million standard years, but awake, ready to rebuild all that they had lost, to restore the Necron dynasties to their former glory. This was the Silent King's final order, and as the last tomb world sealed its subterranean vaults, Zaskareth destroyed the command protocols by which he had controlled his people for so long, for he had failed them utterly. Without a backward glance, Zaskareth, the last of the Silent Kings of the Triarch, took ship into the starless void of intergalactic space, there to find whatever measure of solace or penance he could. Meanwhile, aeons passed and the Necrons slept on, their machine slaves and constructs guarding them while they slept on tomb worlds that had been purged of all life to keep the enslavers from their door. This plan worked with an amazing degree of success until the Necrons were awakened by the forces of the Imperium of Man in the late 41st millennium to plague the galaxy once more. They discovered a new and unexpected age of interstellar civilization and war much like the one they had left behind 60 million standard years before. The galaxy is blossoming with life once more, but is still overrun with the latent psychers and worshippers of the infernal warp energies unleashed during the War in Heaven. It will take time and a great many machinations for the Necron dynasties to regain their rightful place as the rulers of the galaxy. The agents of chaos must be overthrown, the dangerous Eldari, inheritors of the Old One's mantle, eliminated, humanity subjugated, and the great work, cutting off the material universe from the warp, completed. before a new age of Necron dominion can truly begin. But the Necrons are ageless and undying, their technology still unmatched by any of the younger races of the galaxy, and time is always on their side. The Necron Ultimatum, received by Planetary Governor Medican Harrow of the Imperial Hive World, Dol 6. Adversary, know that your squalid colony rests upon the rightful crown world of the Novica dynasty. Know that also, while your presence cannot be tolerated, we are bound by a code of honor to allow you the opportunity to withdraw. You are therefore granted 1 solar month, commencing at termination of this transmission, to remove all trace of your presence. If you fail to accept this generous offer, my army shall conclude these negotiations. We advise you not mistake honorable warning for lack of resolve. None can say for sure how many tomb worlds entered the Great Sleep, but it is certain that a great many did not survive into the late 41st millennium. Technologically advanced though the Necrons were, to attempt a stasis sleep for such a scale was a great risk, even for them. For 60 million Terran years the Necrons slept, voicelessly waiting for their chance to complete the Silent King's orders, to restore the Necron dynasties to their former glory. As the centuries passed, ever more tomb worlds fell prey to malfunction or ill fortune. For many, the results were minor, such as a disruption to the operation of the tomb world's chronostat, or revivification chambers, causing the inhabitants to awaken later than intended, but some of the tomb worlds suffered more calamitous events. Cascade failures of stasis crypts destroyed millions, if not billions of dormant Necrons. Some tomb worlds were destroyed by the retribution of marauding Eldari, the defense systems overmatched by these ancient enemies of the Necrons. Other tomb worlds fell victim to the uncaring evolution of the galaxy itself. Tectonically unstable planets crushed Necron strongholds slumbering at their hearts. Stars went supernova, consuming orbiting tomb worlds in their death throes. And everywhere, inquisitive life forms scabbered and fought over the bones of the Necron territories, causing more damage in their unthinking search for knowledge than the vengeful Eldari ever could. The Great Awakening has been far from precise, and the Necrons have not arisen as one people, but in fitful starts over a scattered millennia, like some gestalt sleeper rising from a troubled dream. Errors in circuitry and protocols ensured that a revivification destined to take place in the early years of the 41st millennium of Imperial calendar actually began far earlier in a few cases, or is yet to occur at all in others. The very first tomb worlds revived to see the great crusade of the Emperor of Mankind sweep across the galaxy in the late 30th millennium. A handful stirred in time to see the Nova Terra interregnum, when Nova Terra challenged the might of the Golden Throne in the 34th millennium for 900 years, or arose at the hour in which the apostles of the Blind King waged their terrible wars that began in 550.M37. Some have still never awoken. Even now, in the era Indomitus of the 41st millennium, billions of Necrons still slumber in their stasis tombs, silently awaiting the clarion call of destiny. It is rare for a tomb world to awaken to full function swiftly, but with the slightest flaw in the revivification cycle, the enigmatic pathways of a Necron sleeper scatter and degrade. In most cases, these coalesce over time to restore identity and purpose, but it is a process that can take solar decades, or even Terran centuries, and cannot be hurried. Sometimes recovery never occurs, and the sleeper is doomed forever to a mindless state. There are thousands of tomb worlds scattered throughout the galaxy, whose halls are thronged with shambling automatons, Necrons whose minds have fled during the long hibernation, and whose bodies have been co-opted by the tomb world's master atomic program in attempt to bring some form of order to their existence. Other Necrons refer to such places as the Severed Worlds, and they loathe and fear their inhabitants in equal measure. None of this is to say that even an individual Necron, lucky enough to achieve a flawless revivification, awakens alert and aware. One of the hidden tyrannies of the biotransference was how it entrenched the gulf between the rulers and the ruled. But there were not enough resources to provide all Necron tier with living metal bodies that possessed the density of the enagrammic pathways required to retain the full gamut of personality and awareness. Thus, as ever was the case, the very finest necrodermis bodies went to the individuals of the highest rank within the Necrotier society, the Pharaons and Overlords, their Cryptex and Nemesors. For the professional soldiery, the merely adequate was deemed appropriate. As for the common people, they received that which remained comparatively crude mechanical bodies that were little more than lobotomized prisons for their minds. Numb to all joy and experience, they are bound solely to the will of their betters, their function meaningless without constant direction. Yet even here, a tiny spark of self-awareness remains, enough only to torment the Necron with vague memories and echoes of the past it once knew. For those tortured creatures, death would be far preferable, but alas, they no longer have the wit to realize, or the autonomy to search it out. Having slept so still and for so long, it is not possible for a tomb world to awaken quickly into a fully alert state. While dormant, each tomb world stasis tombs are controlled by a master artificial intelligence program known as the Deep Spirit, or Tomb Mind, that oversees its essential maintenance and defense, mobilizing what resources it judges appropriate to any given situation or threat. As the long-awaited time of awakening nears, as best can be judged by each Tomb Mind, more of its systems are brought online, and more of the interred revived. A tomb world is at its most vulnerable during the revivification process. The colossal amounts of energy generated are detectable across light years, and are an irresistible lure to the inquisitive and acquisitive alike. In its early stages, a tomb world's defense lies in the hands of the Necron robotic servitor constructs, the Canotech spiders, scarabs, and wraiths. Initially, these defenders will be directed by the tomb world's Tomb Mind, whose complex arithmetic decision matrix allows it to calculate an efficient response to any perceived threat. As the threat level rises, so does too the intensity of the master program's countermeasures, prioritizing the activation of the tomb world's automated defenses and the revivification of its armies according to the needs of the situation at hand. If all goes well, the master program's actions will be sufficient to drive out the invader, or at least stall their progress until the first Necron legions have awoken. Often, it is the lower order of Necrons, the Necron warriors and immortals, that are awakened in the initial phases. These nearly mindless automatons, following their lifeless protocols, are brought online first, so that the way might be prepared for the more senior members of the dynasty. As each tier of the Necron's dynasty hierarchy is revived, each more intelligent and bearing more individuality than the last, the whole process gradually begins to appear more like the workings of an ancient civilization and less like some great machine. At the allotted time, a Necron overlord is awakened, and upon their full revival, the Tomb Mind succeeds power to its creators. From that point onward, a truly ancient mind leads the tomb world, and what happens next depends entirely upon their character and ambition. Having been awakened and control turned over to an overlord, the tomb world must in time take its place in the domains of the Necron dynasty that created it. While many dynasties have never been awakened, and due to a variety of disasters never will, many are slowly piecing together their former domains. One world at a time, empires that vanished aeons ago are being rebuilt, and long-dormant hierarchies are reasserting themselves once more. At the center of each of these risen empires is a crown world, the glorious capital and seat of the Pharaon who rules the entire dynasty. Below it are numerous lesser tomb worlds and other Necron holdings, though rarely are these anywhere near as extensive as they were in their full glory 60 million standard years ago. When a large population center of a younger race of the galaxy has evolved or expanded across the stars close to a tomb world, the encoded programming delves deep into its data archives and armories in order to conduct an aggressive defense. Such tomb worlds are the ones that have expanded their spheres of influence most rapidly, for its rulers have awakened to their full military might already, mobilized and awaiting their commands. Indeed, the speed in which many tomb worlds of the Saltec dynasty have recovered lost territory is chiefly attributable to the ultimately doomed wave of Ulameth colonies established on their core worlds during the late 39th millennium. To external observers, the behavior of most tomb worlds must seem eclectic, almost to the point of randomness. Some Necron lords send diplomatic embassies to other worlds, negotiating for the return of lost territories and technological artifacts, or cast off into the stars searching for distant tomb worlds not yet awoken. Other focus attention inwards, avoiding unnecessary conflict with alien races to pursue eternal politics or oversee the rebuilding of their planet to the glory of 6 million years past. The vast majority of tomb worlds, however, take a more aggressive tack, launching resource raids, planetary invasions, or full-blown genocidal purges, the Necrons' former Catan masters once called the Red Harvests. Yet even here it is impossible to predict the precise form these deeds will take. Sometimes the Necrons attack in full panoply and spectacle of honorable war, rigorously applying their ancient codes of battle. At others, every possible underhanded tactic is employed, from piracy and deception to assassination and subordination. On other occasions, the campaign is less a martial action than a systematic extermination, the swatting of lesser lifeforms as they themselves would swat insects. All of these acts, diverse though they are in scope and method, are directed towards a single common goal, the restoration of the Necron dynasties to rule over the galaxy. Yet with the Triarch long gone and huge number of tomb worlds lying desolate or still dormant, there can be no galaxy-wide coordination, no grand strategy that will bring about the Necron ascendancy. Instead, each tomb world's ruler must first fend for themselves, pursuing whatever course they deem most suited to circumstance. For some, this is the domination of nearby threats, and the sowing of terror on alien worlds. For others, it might be the recovery of cultural treasures of the lost Necron tier, the stockpiling of raw strategic materials for campaigns yet to come, or even the search for an organic species whose bodies might prove to be as suitable vessels for the Necron mines, thus finally ending the curse of the biotransference. Indeed, this last matter, the apotheosis from the undying machine back to living being, is the key motivating factor for many Necron nobles and royals, for its possibility weighed heavily on the Silent King's mind at the moment of his final command. All this is further complicated by the fact that the departure of the Silent King and the dissolution of the Necron-tier Empire's Triarch left no clear succession. As a result, the rulers of many tomb worlds see an opportunity not only to restore the dynasties of old, but also improve their standing within the galaxy-wide Necron political hierarchy. The motives of the Necron nobles and royals are often muddled by the pursuit of personal power, making accurate divinations of an individual's intentions, and therefore of the campaigns conducted by the Undying Legions nigh impossible. Only now, as more and more tomb worlds awaken, is a pattern becoming visible to those whose mission it is to stand watch upon the trackless reaches of the galaxy and beyond. Piecing together scattered accounts of skull-faced Reaper machines rising from the dust of dead worlds the length and breadth of the galaxy, the Xenos savants of the Imperial Inquisition are faced with a stark realization. What at first appeared to be unrelated alien raids serving no overall purpose were in fact the heralds of disaster for galactic proportions facing the Imperial of Man. The Necrons are still a shadowy presence rather than the full-fledged force in the galaxy of the present time. They strike out of nowhere without warning, wreak havoc, and leave before any major reinforcements can arrive. The origin of these various attacks and their motives are unknown, though it is known that the current Necron forces in the galaxy are only soul harvesters, not the full-fledged fighting machines of the C'tan. They seem to attack from nowhere, often simply appearing at nearly any location in the galaxy, no matter how well defended. Once in the recent past, they touched down on Mars, simply passing by the Imperial Navy fleets protecting the Sol system unnoticed, and ultimately casting doubt on the impregnable status of Terra itself. The Necrons reached the red planet's surface and explored its subterranean Noctis Labyrinthus, perhaps in search of one of their C'tan masters, believed to be the entity known in the legends of the Adeptus Mechanicus as the Dragon of Mars, before being destroyed by the agents of the Imperium. This incident, however, is a heavily guarded secret within the Imperium of Man, which greatly fears that the Necrons may awaken the entity which may be the C'tan, called the Void Dragon, which inhabits a stasis tomb beneath the sands of Mars. At the same time, the Imperium has been unable to capture a Necron in an attempt to learn its secrets. Entire Necron forces simply vanish into thin air using their phase technology, and they always take their dead with them. The Necron forces come from tomb worlds, as yet uncharted by the Imperium. Their phase technology allows them to deploy anywhere in the galaxy almost instantaneously, through unknown means. In defeat, they phase out and return to their associated tomb world for repairs. Any Necrons that have fallen in battle can be repaired there and reanimated, so their losses thus far have been minimal. Should a Necron be totally annihilated in battle, then they are truly beyond phase out or repair. But again, often so little survives that the scientists of living races have nothing to study. The Necrons may have infiltrated the Imperium to an extent. Their elite anti-psycho troops, the Pariahs, are an unholy cross of human mutant and Necron technology. It is believed by some Adeptus Mechanicus savants that the Necrons had the Pariah gene engineered into what became the human gene pool over 60 million Terran years ago. This gene has since manifested itself in the agents of the Calaxus Temple, the specialized anti-psycho assassins of the Officiato Assassinorum. Recently, however, there has been a dramatic decrease in the use of the Necron Pariahs in Necron armies, and the Ordo Xenos believes that these troops may have not been proven as effective as Necron commanders had once hoped, and are being phased out of Necron Dynasty's order of battle. Of all the galaxy's great powers, only the craft-world Eldari see the Necrons for the threat they truly are to all other sentient species, and even they cannot be sure how many tomb worlds slumber in the darkness. After the war in heaven, the Eldari took up a silent watch for any sign of Necron re-emergence, and set watch on worlds they suspected of nurturing hidden stasis tombs. Many such worlds were seeded with life and adopted as homes by the Asoranani, outcasts, and Exodites, whose descendants would maintain the vigil where this was not possible. Suspected tomb worlds were marked on a great crystal map so that their locations would not be lost as the millennia passed. Yet as the ages of the galaxy passed, the Eldari became distracted by their own plights, and thus forgot the duty they had sworn to uphold for their lost patrons, the Old Ones. By the time of the fall of the Eldari in the 30th millennium, the terrible birth of the Chaos God Slanesh, the slumbering Necrons had all been but forgotten. Only in the Black Library, and amongst a few outspoken segments of Eldari society, did the vigil continue. For the Eldari, the Necrons are a nightmare come to life. The children of Isha hold soullessness to the very worst of all fates, and the Necrons therefore provoke an unbinding terror that the Eldari can never truly suppress. For the Seer Council of Alatok Craftworld, however, a time of terrible vindication is at hand. The Asoriani of Alatok remembered their ancient duty, whilst their peers forgot. They recovered the fragments of the great map from one of the Crone worlds of the Eye of Terror, spread their networks of outcasts and exodites ever wider, and waited for their ancient enemy to return. So it is that while most of the Asuriyani craft worlds are rehoning half-remembered strategies from the War in Heaven, Alatok is reaching its hand, assailing the Necrons on their own territory, sabotaging their tomb worlds, and bringing the fight to their legions of undying warriors whenever the opportunity presents itself. In the 41st millennium, humanity is widespread throughout the stars of the galaxy and encounters the Necrons with some frequency, but there is no mechanism by which the experience of the embattled world can be shared with the wider Imperium of Man. Even if there were, by what means would the data be catalogued? Hundreds of human worlds are depopulated or destroyed every year, and if their fates are noted at all by the Administratum, the cause of their demise is rarely discovered. There is no single repository of information in the Imperium, no established central historical record, in a galaxy-spanning civilization so shrouded in ignorance and superstition. It would be remarkable if it were otherwise. Some Imperial scholars hold that the slaughter of the Sisters of Battle, stationed at Sanctuary 101 in 897.M41, represented the first contact between mankind and the Necrons. Such individuals do so in ignorance of the many millions of encounters that, though predating the Sanctuary 101 event, went entirely unremarked upon because no one survived to make note of them. The records were lost or deemed mythic, or simply took place on a world where the inhabitants made no distinction between differing alien perils. More so, it displays the classic arrogance of those who assume that the boundaries of their knowledge are, in fact, the boundaries of reality. What follows is a list of the most pertinent recent events in the history of the reawakened Necron race and its encounters with other intelligent cultures of the galaxy. 666.M41 the Yuctan Incident. The Yuctan system was a sparsely inhabited Imperial star system close to the Eastern French, and the site of the first naval encounter between the Necrons and the Imperial Navy in 666.M41. A minor Imperial fleet of 6 escort ships and 1 light cruiser were destroyed, with the only survivor being a single Cobra-class destroyer. By the time a full Imperial fleet could be dispatched to the region to deal with what is now called the Yuctan Incident, the Necrons had disappeared, and the system was found devoid of all human life. Although similar and unexplained events had taken place up to this time, the incident at Yuctan was the first fully documented account of a Necron harvest of a populated world, as they sought fresh subjects for their research into apotheosis, the restoration of their consciousness to organic bodies. 744.M41 The Return of the Silent King. The long-lost final Silent King of the Necron Triarch, Zaskarath, enters the bounds of the Milky Way galaxy once more. Having encountered the Tyranids in the intergalactic void, he recognizes the threat they pose to the Necron's apotheosis. If the Tyranids devour all organic life in the galaxy, the Necrons will never find living bodies to house their consciousness. Thus does the Silent King break his self-imposed exile with the goal of marshalling his people against this new threat. However, the Silent King has not anticipated the torpor in which the majority of the Necrons still lie. Many tomb worlds have been damaged over the aeons. Others still slumber, and most of those that have awoken are still disorientated or somehow damaged. The Silent King is therefore forced to re-evaluate his plans. Working with the surviving Triarch Batarians, he begins a pilgrimage across the galaxy, stirring those tomb worlds yet to revive, and speeding the recovery of those tomb worlds already awake. It is the Silent King's wish that the younger race's flawed attempts to destroy the Tyranids do not simply feed the invading hive fleets beyond the point where even a united Necron people have any hope of victory. 781.M41 Storm clouds gather. After long years of preparation, Imhotep the Stormlord assumes control of the crown world Mandragora as the pharaoh of the Sektek dynasty and begins his conquest of the galaxy. 793.M41 Raid on Solomons. Following the onset of Hive Fleet Behemoth's assault on the galaxy and its defeat at the Battle of Macragge, the xenobiologists and inquisitors of the Imperium are left with many questions that require answers. One such question brings Inquisitor Helena Valeria to the ghost world of Solomons, seeking an explanation for why that world had gone untouched, when all other planets in the Hive Fleet's path now lie destroyed and consumed. Nothing could have prepared Valeria for what she finds in the silent darkness beneath Solomons' pitted and barren surface. Endless catacombs filled with highly advanced Xenos technology, long-lost artifacts from the Imperium's history, and gallery after gallery of intricate life-size holographic sculptures laid out in a silent tableau to commemorate historic scenes. Valera's party is briefly awestruck by what they discover, but then the entire tomb world comes to angry life. Wave after wave of Karatex scarabs and Necron warriors descend from all sides, and the still air is filled with the whine of discharging Gauss weapons. Seeking to regain the initiative for her besetted acolytes and followers, Valera leads the charge against the shadowy figure orchestrating the carnage. Sighting carefully, Valera unleashes a pulse from her graviton beamer that reduces the Necron Lord to a mangled and fused scrap. Yet moments later, an identical figure emerges from the darkness, pale and undamaged. This time Valera plunges the dagger of Midnight's blade into her adversary's heart, yet even as her opponent's sparking frame sinks to the ground, another identical Necron Lord strides forward, trampling the now faceless ruin at her feet. With that, Valera orders a retreat back to her team's waiting shuttles. Only a handful of her acolytes survive to reach their destination, and they do so empty-handed. Much to Valera's disappointment, the tomb world of Solomons keeps all of its glorious secrets. Sometime after the conflict, Valeri received a personal hyperscroll message from Tarzan himself, thanking her for sending 5 regiments of Catachan jungle fighters to add to his galleries. Accompanying the message as a return gift was a hyperstone maze, one of the series of tesseract labyrinths constructed at the height of the Charvnovica dynasty. It is unknown what became of this gift thereafter. 798.M41 The Siege of Samona. Imhotep the Stormlord and the forces of the Sukta dynasty repel a war host of Asuriani from the craftworld Alatok, commanded by Farseer Aldorath Starbane, from the minor tomb world of Samona during the campaign later known as the Siege of Samona. Following the campaign, Samona agrees to join the Sukta dynasty's growing empire. Starbane is the only survivor of the assault, and he is sent back to Alatok, but with one hand amputated by Imhotep. As a reminder of his defeat, the Asuriani of Alatok prepare to launch a major assault on the Sukta dynasty. 799.M41 The Unexpected End of the Wa Headcrumper. Big Mech Headcrumper leads his Orc Wa to the newly awakened tomb world of Soranas. After initial skirmishes prove his still lethargic Necrons to be no match for the Orcs, the Necron Lord Neptek strikes a pact with Headcrumper in exchange for several dozen functioning Doomsday cannons. Headcrumper agrees to leave Soranis and seek plunder elsewhere, while secretly resolving to return to Soranis at a later date. 3 solar months later, when the Wa descends on the Imperial Agri-world of Eden Prime, Edkrumpa is unable to resist his urge to investigate the Doomsday Cannon systems. One breach containment core later, and Edkrumpa, his Wa, and the planet Eden Prime are erased from existence. 805.M41 The Ruin of Morrigar. A battle between hive gangs on the Imperial Hive world of Morrigar inadvertently awakens the Necron tomb world hidden there. All contact with Morrigar by the Imperium is lost shortly thereafter, when the Astra Militarium's 207th Cadian Shock Troop Regiment makes planetfall 6 solar months later. There is no trace of any inhabitants, human or otherwise. Before the Imperial Guardsmen can leave Morrigar, the nomadic Necron warlord Anranka the Traveler arrives. Assuming the humans are responsible for the apparent destruction of the tomb world, he launches an attack that leaves his own forces decimated and the Cadian 207th utterly eliminated. 813.M41 Escape from Canavar. At Nemesor Zandref's instruction, the Necron armies of the tomb world of Gidrim invade the Tau world of Canavar, routing the planetary defenders after 2 standard weeks of campaigning. The Necron victory is short-lived, however. A demi-company of White Scar Space Marines, led by Corsano Khan, arrive on Canavar, pursuing a now obsolete punitive mission against the previous Tau inhabitants. As overwhelming volley of Gauss weapon fire destroys the White Scar's Thunderhawks moments after they land, leaving Corsaro and his battle brothers to fight a bold but doomed series of hit-and-run battles. Almost all of the White Scars are slain on the Uzme Plateau, but Zan Derek commands that Corsano Khan be spared and imprisoned. So does Corsano begin a peculiar period of captivity beneath the surface of Canavar. Zan Derek treats him with honor, though few of the other Necron lords even acknowledge his presence. At a bizarre feast, where food is placed down before Zandrak and his court, but goes uneaten, Corsano learns he is but one of a dozen prisoners. With the desire for freedom outweighing any ranklement or rivalry, Corsano and the other captives conspire to escape. The Necrons are slow to react, and so the breakout goes well at first. Only when Vargard Oberon takes command do things go badly for the escapees. Several of the fugitives are slayed by Oberon's war scythe, leaving only Corsano and the Asuriani ranger by the name of Iliac Nightspear to fight on, and the latter swiftly receives a blow that sends him sprawling from the fight. Thus does the battle devolve into a duel atop bleeding bodies and broken machines. Corsaro's sword is quicker and guided by a desperate fury, but Oberon's undying machine body repairs any damage with only moments. Little by little, Corsaro's tires, and the sweeping war scythe comes closer to connecting with each swing. Finally, one of the Vargard's blows is too swift for the Khan to evade. The war scythe slices through his armor and deep into his flesh. Before Oberon can finish his foe, there is an intervention from an unexpected source. Unknown to either combatants, Zandarek was watching the fight from afar, and impressed by Corsaro's skill and bravery, orders Oberon to stand aside and to let him leave. Dragging the crippled Nightspear behind, Corsaro finally escapes to the surface, finds a still functioning Tau spacecraft, and leaves Canavar far behind. Corsaro and the Nightspear part ways shortly after, the Asuriani to his craft world, and the White Scar to Chgoris. Shortly after the Khan's return to his chapter planet, Nemesar Zandarev and Vargard Oberon are added to the Scrolls of Vengeance, their names to be put forward as possible quarry for the next great hunt of the White Scar's chapter. 815.M41 The Disappearance of Explorator Fleet 913. Explorator Fleet 913 strays into territory controlled by the tomb world of Gedin, and is destroyed by the fleet of Nemesaur Azdaron. When the Void battle is over, wreckage is set adrift in the projected territory of the Asuryani's Alatok craft world. By the time 3 companies of Ultramarines come in to search for the Adaptus Mechanicus overdue Explorator fleet, Azdaron has long withdrawn, but the presence of Alatok's Pathfinder vessels draw the Space Marines into a conflict with the Craftworld Eldari, who they blame for the destruction of the Imperial vessels. 824.M41 The Return of Thazar the Invincible. The shadow-shrouded Imperial world of Athonos is racked by severe earth tremors. The cause remains a mystery until a colossal tomb ship, captained by the Necron pirate king, Thazar the Invincible, emerges from beneath the ground, shedding soil, rock, and fragments of Habblock from its hull as it rises after 60 million standard years. The world's defenses are understandably in disarray. Fortunately for the inhabitants, Thazar has yet to realize that humans are an intelligent form of life, and pays no more attention to the panicked defenders than he would to a nest of insects. The Athonian planetary capital lies in ruins, but the rest of the planet survives relatively unscathed as the tomb ship heads into the stars, towards the tomb world of Zapanek, the crown world of the Sarkanek dynasty, that he will soon rule as Pharaon, pausing only to obliterate a hollow-stealthed Asuryani listening post hidden in the near orbit for millennia. 829.M41 The Enslavement of Ariane. Necron Overlord Vitok masterminds the invasion of an imperial hive world of Ariane. After a long and bloody siege, Ariane's planetary governor accepts Vitok's terms, and Ariane becomes a slave world in service of the Necron Ultimatum dynasty. 831.M41 The Dissolution of Burr. After a long archaeological expedition on the mysterious planet of Fal, famed explorator Benedict Draconis returns to the binary worlds of Burr. The Imperial Planetary Governor holds a banquet in Draconis' honor, which proves to be the fatal mistake when a swarm of mind-shackled scarabs burst bloodily from the explorator's brain to feast on the governor and his guests. From there, the mind-shackled scarabs multiply and swiftly infest Burr's military echelons. With his trap sprung, and much of the binary world's defenses thus under his control, the Necron Overlord Janzik of Val launches an invasion of Burr. Burr Major is the first planet to fall, thanks to the recklessness of the part of its remaining human defenders, but soon both worlds are firmly under Necron control. The dissolution furnaces roar day and night, and when Captain D. Estev and the Fire Lord's chapters, if company finally arrive, all they can do is destroy Zantknev in retaliation for his deeds. 857.M41 The Lazar Blockade. Seeking vengeance for the destruction wrought upon their fourth company, the Silver Skulls blockade the Lazar system and attempt to purge the Necrons from its planets. Though the main tomb world is overwhelmed and obliterated, the Silver Skulls are quick to regret their hasty assault, as secondary Necron bases throughout the system whir into life. Unable to admit defeat, the Silver Skulls dig in, and what should have been a simple exercise in reciprocity becomes a far more grueling campaign. Later, 5 Space Marine chapters, including the Death Spectres, Howling Griffins, and the Silver Skulls, blockade the Lazar system to purge the Necrons from its planets in vengeance for the damage suffered by the Silver Skull's 4th Company. The Space Marines overwhelm and obliterate the main tomb world. However, secondary bases throughout the system suddenly come to life. Rather than withdraw, the Silver Skulls dig in for a grueling campaign. 859.M41 The Traveler has come. The nomadic Necron overlord Arankea, the Traveler, arrives in the embattled Lazar system and immediately joins his forces to those defending against the Silver Skulls and other Space Marines' onslaught. Necron victory is finally assured at the Battle of Dread Peak, when Arankea's Pyrean Eternals spearheaded an assault on the Silver Skulls downed battle barge Argent Hammer. Though the Space Marines battle hard against the veterans of Pyera, their efforts are undone when Arankea seizes control over the battle barge's still functioning weapon batteries and turns their fury on the Imperial defenders. With their chapter master slain and their forces in disarray, the Silver Skulls are forced to withdraw to their blockade of Lazar, though they take great care to ensure that the word of their defeat does not spread. His duty done, Arankea takes ship and heads out into the galaxy once more to aid the Necron cause. 910.M41 The Storm Grows. Imhotep campaigns are halted briefly by the Imperium's resolute defense of the Forge World Hypnoth. Astra Militarium and Space Marine reinforcements flood into the battle zone, and though they cannot achieve a lasting victory, they succeed in tying down the Necron assault for several months. Encouraged by the prophecies of the Astromancer Orican the Diviner, Imhotep finally breaks the stalemate by launching a series of attacks on Hypnoth's supply worlds, Fredea's Satyr and Nyx. The first two raids perform entirely as expected, with the worlds laid to waste and their vital supplies destroyed or claimed by the Suktek forces. However, an unforeseen Tyranid infestation on Nyx wreaks havoc amongst the Necron forces and threatens to completely derail Imhotep's entire campaign. Nevertheless, Imhotep rises to the challenge, weaving a strategy that manipulates the Tyranid swarm into venting its fury on the remaining Imperial defenders. With both sides thus distracted, Imhotep is able to extricate his remaining forces. 911.M41 The Fall of Hypnoth. Suktek Dynasty's cryptex succeeded in introducing a mechnophage into the defense systems of Forge World Hypnoth, reducing its formidability armed bastions to helpless ferrocret shells. Despite a hilarious defense by the Flesh Terrors and Iron Hand Space Marines, Hypnoth is conquered by the Necrons within solar days. 912.M41 to 926.M41 The Assault on the World Engine. A violent coup on the tomb world of Borsis sees its introspective Necron Lord replaced by one of the more expansionist bent. Thus are the long-dormant engines of the artificial tomb world of Borsis fired into life once more, signaling the start of a Necron campaign that leaves much of the Imperium of Man's Vida sector in ruins. The massive mobile artificial tomb world of Borsis, known to the Imperium as the World Engine, was attacked in 926.M41 by 15 Space Marine task forces, plus elements of the Imperial Navy, and even the mightiest weapons the Imperial forces could bring to bear could not harm it. Drop pods and torpedoes could not penetrate its shields, and it was impossible to lock on to with teleport beams. The Imperial Task Force tried 12 times to overwhelm it through sheer valor and firepower, and was rewarded with a string of destroyed and crippled starships and millions of casualties. The World Engine destroyed a third of the entire Imperial Navy's battle fleet before the chapter master of the Astral Knights chapter decided to ram the hideous planetoid with his battle barge, the Tempestus. It was only when the enormous Space Marine starship collided with the Necron's construct's shields that they finally failed, allowing the Imperial forces to approach their target. A force of over 700 Astral Knights deployed from drop pods onto the Necron's vessel surface. For over 100 solar hours, the Astral Knights fought against tens of thousands of Necron warriors, and destroyed every flux generator, weapon forge, and command node they came upon. Only after the chapter had been reduced in size to the chapter master, Arthur Amrad, and 5 battle brothers, did they succeed in their quest. Amrad detonated melter charges that destroyed a vast Necron tomb complex that housed many of the World Engine's command rays, which brought down the vessel's impenetrable void shields, and also silenced the machine's weaponry. This allowed the Imperial Navy starships to destroy the World Engine with Sliconic torpedoes. After the battle, as the Adaptus Mechanicus picked over the remains of the destroyed World Engine, the Ultramarines retrieved the twisted wreckage of the Tempestus and placed it amid the ruins of Safehold, the planet that had been the last victim of the World Engine. The 2nd and 4th companies of the Blood Angels had been amongst the Astartes task force dispatched to the Vida sector to assist their fellow Space Marines against the threat posed by the World Engine. After the sacrifice of the Astral Knights led to the final destruction of the World Engine, Captain Donatos Aphiel of the 2nd Company proposed that an Imperial Shrine be erected upon the world of Safehold in eternal memory of the Astral Knights chapter. The shrine consists of several 172 Arblestone statues, one for every Astral Knight battle brother that died stopping the World Engine, that stands a silent vigil within the dead heart of the Tempestus. From that day forth, 2 Blood Angels of the 2nd Company and battle brothers from nearly a dozen other chapters are always assigned to stand guard over the memorial, which is considered a singular honor for the Astartes that fought beside them for the last time. 930.M41 The Battle of Schrödinger 7. In 930.M41, the forces of the infamous Necron overlord Imhotep the Stormlord, Pharaon of the powerful Suktek dynasty, descended upon the frozen plains of the Imperial Ice World of Schrödinger 7. The Necrons drove the local defenders to the shelters of the labyrinthine cryonite mines, but when unable to prevent the planet's astropathic acquire from dispatching a distress hymnal, a counterattack swiftly arrived in the form of a Black Templar strike force under the command of Marshal Helbrecht. Imhotep was not caught by surprise so easily, and had already shifted his undying Necron armies into a formidable defensive configuration. Helbrecht led the assault, intended as a crippling alpha strike, but was instead blunted by a series of impeccable planned Necron ambushes on the Space Marines drop pod and Thunderhawk drop zones. As the frozen caverns echoed to the roar of explosions, scores of Black Templars and Necrons alike were hurled into rivers of molten cryonite. Eventually, Imhotep and Helbrecht met in single combat atop the stalactite heavy span of an ice bridge. In the battle that followed, Helbrecht, driven by a zeal and hatred of the Xenos, dealt Imhotep a dozen ruinous blows, but each time the Theron's living necrodermis was able to quickly repair in a matter of seconds. Despite being the better swordsman, Helbrecht failed to land a crippling blow on his opponent, and as the duel drew on, the Marshal finally collapsed under the assault of the Necron Overlord, blood flowing from a score of serious wounds. However, instead of finishing off his opponent, Imhotep brought his warscythe down and merely severed Helbrecht's right hand to remind the Marshal of his much-deserved defeat. Helbrecht roared in fury and pain as Imhotep pitched him off the ice bridge to the frigid cavern floor far below. The surviving Black Templars quickly rallied to their fallen Marshal's side and made a fighting retreat, leaving Schrödinger 7 in the Stormlord's hands. Following this humiliating defeat, Helbrecht swore an oath of vengeance against the Necrons in general, and Imhotep in particular, vowing that next time they meet, only one would leave the battlefield alive. 955.M41 Alliance at Devil's Crag. The Silent King Zasrak reluctantly joined forces with the Space Marines of the Blood Angels chapter to defeat a Tyranid splinter fleet. Commander Dante and the 3rd Company of the Blood Angels chapter battled against the Necrons legions of the Silent King amidst the dusty waste of the world of Gehenna. For 3 solar weeks, neither side could seize the upper hand, with Dante's tactical brilliance stretched to its limits in countering the time-space manipulations of the Silent King. The stalemate was broken only when a Tyranid splinter fleet entered orbit, forcing the two armies to break off hostilities and fight the common foe. The impromptu alliance proved to be the Tyranids' undoing. Following the final battle at Devil's Crag, Dante and the Silent King went their separate ways. Both forces too battle-worn to guarantee victory over the other, and at least for the Blood Angels, the idea of turning on those who had just recently fought alongside proved rather distasteful. 970.M41 The Hall of Swords. The Emperor's Swords chapter of Space Marines, the second to bear that name, is destroyed when a tomb world awakens beneath their fortress monastery, on the world of Bellicas. Those forces isolated outside are swiftly overwhelmed, but the fate of those within is far grimmer. Subverting the system of the fortress monastery, a conclave of cryptics shut down the defenses and entombed the Space Marines within their own citadel. Seeking sport from their captives, the new rulers of Bellicas take it in turns to lead waves of Necron warriors through the shadowed halls, each with their aim of accruing more kills than their peers. Though the Space Marines fight with determination and never once surrender to terror, after 3 weeks the contest goes to the Necron Lord Trachias for his personal decapitation of Captain Arnok von Rain. 973.M41 Damnos Incident. By some fateful quirk, the Necron tomb on the mining world of Damnos wakes swiftly to full function, overwhelming the human settlers and repelling a counterattack by the Ultramarine 2nd Company. The Necrons of Damnos then proceed to awaken their dolmen gates and reconquer a crucial spar of the webway, driving out the Asuriani who had reclaimed its paths during the Great Sleep. With their webway access restored, Necron raiding parties from Damnos reach out across the Ultima Segmentum of the Imperium of Man, leaving carnage in their wake. 985.M41 Fall of the Inevitable Conqueror. Marshal Helbrecht would get a chance at fulfilling his oath of vengeance after the events on Schrödinger 7, when his Crusade fleet detected a Necron activity around the Suktek dynasty's core worlds of Davitas in 985.M41. Moving swiftly to intercept, Helbrecht rejoiced when their quarry was identified as the Inevitable Conqueror, Imhotep's tomb ship, and the Suktek flagship. Moving in with all haste, the Black Templar's battle barge Sigismund managed to land crippling broadside blows on the Inevitable Conqueror's propulsive array, stranding it in place. Intending to get his revenge on his opponent personally, Helbrecht ordered an immediate teleport and brooding torpedo assault upon the Necron tomb ship. Within minutes, the decks of the Inevitable Conqueror were swarming with vengeful Black Templars Astartes. Alas, Helbrecht would not get the satisfaction of seeing his opponent. While Imhotep's pride urged him to fight, logic won out, and the Stormlord teleported himself and many of his most valuable assets away from his flagship to his unengaged escort ships. The Necrons immediately accelerated away from the fighting and made good their escape. Fuming with impotent rage, Helbrecht could only gain a meager measure of satisfaction from ensuring the total destruction of the Inevitable Conqueror by personally setting his foe's beloved flagship on a collision course with the closest star. The frustrated Helbrecht reaffirmed his oath of vengeance, swearing once again that he would see Imhotep dead once and for all. Those Black Templars with some familiarity with the undying Necrons fear that their marshal has bitten off more than he can chew. While Helbrecht is certainly capable of besting the Necron Pharaon in single combat, preventing the undying mechanical fiend from teleporting to safety and destroying Imhotep outright may prove to be an impossible feat for a single chapter of the Space Marines, no matter their zeal. 991.m41 to 999.m41, the Orphean War. Having reached their intended strength, the Maynarch dynasty attacked the Imperial Orpheus sector on the edge of Segmentum Tempestus. The attack was preceded by a communication blackout which left the Orpheus sector cut in two. The Necrons advanced in two distinct lines of battle, one invading the sector from the outer darkness, with a second entering the sector from galactic south and the territories of the former Layak sector. Unable to call for help, the entire eastern half of the Orpheus sector succumbed quickly, with only the Space Marines of the Angel's Revenant chapter putting up a true fight. But even their sacrifice was not enough to stop the Xenos advance. 100 solar days after the Maynarch offensive began, the silence was broken, and a tide of astropathic warnings and distress signals reached the Orpheus sector's capital world, Amara Prime. Only now realizing that it had come under attack, the Imperium mobilized its vast armies, which could not prevent the Dracelian subsector from being overrun. Led by their greatest nemesis, Mactalan Kutala, the Necrons inexplicably stopped their advance. After 100 solar days, as tradition demanded it, their enemy would give in 2 cycles of the ancient Necron tier moon to prepare themselves to meet their death. The Orpheus sector Imperial Governor Calibor Lan used this time to turn his world, Amara Prime, into a fortress, stripping other worlds of their defenses and transferring them to Amara. Crusading forces and reinforcements allotted to the purge of the chaos-ridden Chimerium system were rerouted to Amara, including armies drawn from the Necromandan regiments and the fearsome Death Corps of Krieg of the Astra Militarium. Most importantly, perhaps an entire Space Marines chapter, the Minotaurs under Chapter Master Asterion Moloch joined the defenders of Amara, and yet this stronghold of Imperial might was laid low in a single solar day, when the Necrons almost entirely destroyed the powerful battle fleet defending Amara and landed their troops unopposed on the surface. Had it not been for the desperate counterattack of the Minotaurs chapter's fleet and the stoic resistance of the Death Corps, total victory would have been achieved. Yet through great sacrifices and bloody determination, Asterion Moloch faced Kutlak on the bridge of the Mutlak flagship, the Kain-class tomb ship Dead Hand. The Minotaur's chapter master and his elite First Company veterans succeeded in wounding Kutlak before being sucked into the void. Having not anticipated this level of stubbornness amongst their foe, the Necrons retreated with something akin to respect for this vermin, which had settled upon their worlds. For the Imperium, however, the losses at the Battle of Amara proved so severe that the sector had to be abandoned and officially dissolved as a sector imperialist. The fighting, however, continued as the Undying Legions progressed to the Galactic West, and the Imperium tried to salvage what it could from the remains of the Orpheus sector. 999.m41, the Karnak Campaign. The Necron overlord Arachnia the Traveler arrives on a planet he supposed to be the tomb world of Karnak, only to find it infested with Eldari Exodites. Realizing that the tomb, if it remains, will be buried too deep for him to awaken it before the Exodites can themselves summon aid, Arachnia entreated the Necron lords and overlords of other tomb worlds for aid. Reinforcements swiftly arrived from Mandragora, Gidrim, and Trakon, through the most unexpected of all of this is a contingent from Solomons, led by Tarzan the Infinite himself. All this takes time, however, and by the time the Night-sized fleet deploy the invading forces, the armies of Alatok Craftworld stand side by side with the Karnak Exodites. Guided by the prophecies of Farseer Alarath, Starbane, and the strategies of Iliac Nightspear, the Eldari attempt to stall the Necron invasion with a series of hit-and-run attacks. Their aim is to sever the command structure by destroying Arachnia and his closest allies, but the Prothean Lord manages to subvert the prophecies of the Farseer through the astronomic analysis of Orokan the Diviner. Though Orokan's divinations are by no means as focused as those of Eldarath Starbane, they are sufficient to tangle the schemes of fate and leave many details of the campaign beyond the Farseer's reach. So it is that the Pathfinders arrive at what they thought to be Arachnia's location, only to find him long gone and the squads of Deathmarks waiting in ambush. After several inconclusive battles on Karnak's verdant plains, Arachnia's forces the Eldari to engage in a head-to-head confrontation by marching on the Exodite's Wild Spirit Shrine. As the tireless Necron legions advance upon the walls, Doomscythe's duel with the elegant Asuryani fighters in the skies above. Deathmarks ply a deadly trade of ambush and counter-ambush with the Alatok Pathfinders, and all the while Flayed Ones prowl the flanks, pouncing on any Eldari foolish enough to even show a momentary sign of weakness. The two sides are well matched, the Necron hardiness countered by the Eldari tactical precision. Victory finally falls to the Necrons when the Karnak's tomb unexpectedly begins to awaken, stirred from dormancy by the tumult above. With the Necron reinforcements now starting to trickle into the campaign, the Eldari, Asuryani, and the Exodites alike have little choice but to abandon Karnak and the world spirit to their ancient enemies. Anrakia is grimly jubilant in the campaign's aftermath, and gladly ascends when Tarzan requests the entire World Shrine for his collection as spoils of war for his part. Orokan requests no trophy or payment for his part in the victory, and merely hopes that when the flush of victory fades, no one thinks to question the convenient coincidence of the Karnak's tomb's awakening. And thus ends our journey into the Necrons, and finding out all we can about our ancient enemy. Please stay safe. I hope to see you soon.